Black man turned away from job interview. Days later, he's their new manager. Marcus Jefferson sat at his desk, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the soft tap of his keyboard the only sounds breaking the stillness. It was another quiet Thursday morning, one of those nondescript workdays that stretched out before him like an endless road, predictable, unchanging, and somehow always in motion. At 35, Marcus had become far too familiar with this routine. He'd been with the same company for over a decade, ever since graduating from college with a degree in economics. The firm, a sprawling financial powerhouse with offices across the country, had been his first job out of school, and he'd climbed steadily through the ranks. But lately, Marcus felt the weight of time pressing on him. He had become a cog in a machine that barely acknowledged his existence. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. Looking out of his small office window, Marcus could see the world outside moving, people rushing to meetings, traffic blurring past, the sun climbing higher in the sky. He'd been here for years, yet he still felt like an outsider, watching life unfold from the periphery. His career had plateaued somewhere between middle management and something more, and he was starting to believe it might stay there forever. He wasn't unhappy, at least not in the traditional sense, but he wasn't content either. His position had offered stability, a predictable paycheck, benefits, and the comfort of knowing exactly what was expected of him. But the longer Marcus worked in the same role, the more the suffocating sense of stagnation began to creep into his life. He'd been passed over for promotions more times than he could count, despite being qualified for the roles. He'd watched colleagues with fewer qualifications ascend while he remained stuck, always the dependable worker, but never the leader. For years, he had accepted the unspoken truth. His race had played a role in his lack of upward mobility. It was not something anyone ever said outright, but the signs were clear enough. Marcus, a Black man, had learned early in his career that the corporate world was not built for people like him, especially not in upper management. In meetings, he found himself often speaking over or around colleagues who were quick to dismiss his ideas, even when they mirrored their own. He had lost count of the times he'd been told to tone it down, or asked to prove his leadership in ways that others, less qualified than he, were never asked to do. There was a glass ceiling at his company, and it wasn't just made of transparent material. It was thick, impenetrable, and left him constantly questioning his worth. Despite this, Marcus was good at his job. His analytical mind, work ethic, and ability to think outside the box had earned him a solid reputation among his peers and subordinates. People came to him when they needed help solving a problem, and his team trusted him to lead them through complicated projects. His boss, Elaine, had recently praised him in front of the entire department for his excellent work on a high-profile project that had helped the company save millions. But even that recognition felt hollow, a pat on the back for a job well done, not a step toward the promotion Marcus had earned and desperately wanted. At home, his partner Andrea tried to be supportive. She could see the weariness in Marcus' eyes, the way his shoulders slumped every time he returned from work. Andrea worked as a teacher at a local high school, and although her job didn't come with the same corporate pressures, she understood the emotional toll work could take on someone. She had always been the more optimistic of the two, pushing Marcus to see that he could do more, be more, and find a new path if he wasn't happy. But Marcus was hesitant to take that leap. He had grown comfortable in his routine, even if it didn't fulfill him. The thought of leaving everything behind, of stepping into the unknown, was frightening. What if he failed? What if this was as good as it got? After all, many of his colleagues had been at the company for decades, their careers having followed a steady, predictable trajectory. He had built his life around this job and the security it offered. Wasn't that enough? "Marcus, you've been talking about this for years," Andrea would say, her voice laced with frustration as they sat across from one another at their kitchen table. "You can't keep putting this off forever. You know you deserve more than this." "I'm not putting it off," he'd respond, avoiding her gaze. "It's just there's no guarantee in taking that risk. What if I leave and end up with nothing? I can't just jump ship and expect it to work out." Andrea would sigh, looking at him with a mix of sympathy and concern. I get it, but staying here and doing the same thing isn't going to change anything either. You're just spinning your wheels. Marcus would nod, knowing she was right but unwilling to acknowledge the nagging sense of fear and uncertainty in his chest. Deep down, he knew that she was right, that something needed to change. But he had spent so much of his life adhering to the rules, playing it safe, that the idea of breaking free felt impossible. He spent his days in a quiet battle with himself. On the one hand, Marcus longed for something more, a role that challenged him, that recognized his potential and abilities. But on the other hand, he couldn't deny the security of his current position. He had a steady income, health benefits, and a pension plan that would take care of him in his later years. More than that, Marcus was surrounded by the familiar faces of colleagues he had known for years. He had become part of the company's fabric, dependable, reliable, always willing to pick up the slack when things got tough. He was comfortable here, even if the comfort was stifling. Then, one afternoon, Marcus received a phone call that would shake up everything. It was from Jason Lewis, a former college friend who now worked at a rival company. Jason had recently moved up to a managerial role at a company known for its progressive stance on diversity and inclusion. They hadn't spoken much over the years, but Jason had kept tabs on Marcus through social media and had noticed his consistent excellence at work. Marcus. Jason's voice came through the phone, filled with enthusiasm. I've been following your career and I gotta say, you've been killing it. Listen, there's a managerial position opening up at my company, and I want you to apply. I think you'd be a perfect fit. The words took Marcus by surprise. A managerial position? At a company known for its diversity. Jason went on to explain how his company was looking to expand its leadership team with individuals from underrepresented groups. We're really trying to build something different here, Jason said. We need more voices like yours. The offer was tempting. In fact, it was exactly the kind of opportunity Marcus had been dreaming of for years. But just as quickly as the excitement began to rise in his chest, doubt crept in. What if it wasn't as great as Jason made it sound? What if the grass wasn't really greener on the other side? What if he failed and left behind the stability of his current job for nothing? I'll think about it, Marcus had said, his voice betraying his hesitation. Thanks for reaching out, Jason. As he hung up the phone, Marcus sat back in his chair, staring at the same spreadsheet he had been working on all afternoon. His mind began to race. This could be his chance. His chance to escape the stifling environment he had come to resent, his chance to finally break through the glass ceiling that had held him back for so long. Yet, the idea of leaving the safety of his current role made him uneasy. He wasn't sure if he was ready to give up the comfort of the known for the uncertainty of the unknown. He turned his gaze to the office door, where his reflection in the glass caught his eye. For the first time in years, he wondered if he was truly happy, or if he had simply become comfortable with being unhappy. That evening, as Andrea prepared dinner, Marcus sat in silence, pondering the call. Could he take the risk? Could he trust that he had what it took to succeed in a new environment, one that might finally recognize his worth? Or would this be another case of disappointment, another unfulfilled hope that would leave him right back where he started? The answers, for now, remained elusive. But something deep within Marcus knew that change was inevitable. Whether he was ready for it or not, his life, his comfort zone, was about to shift. The days following the phone call from Jason Lewis lingered in Marcus' mind, heavy with the weight of what could be. It had been the first time in years that he had considered leaving the security of his current job and stepping into something new, something unfamiliar. Every time Marcus tried to push the idea away, it seemed to come back stronger. He'd spent hours at home, sitting in his dimly lit living room, the weight of Andrea's concerned gaze fixed on him as he turned the opportunity over in his mind. What did he really want? Was he truly ready to give up everything he had built, everything that had given him a semblance of stability? The next morning, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at his reflection. It was the same face he had seen every day for the last decade. The dark circles under his eyes were a constant reminder of sleepless nights spent wrestling with his own ambitions. The suit he wore felt too tight around his shoulders, his collar digging into his neck. He tried to smooth down the creases in his shirt, but there was no amount of effort that could erase the discomfort he felt within himself. His career had become a routine, a predictable, relentless grind that had worn him down over the years. He thought of the morning meetings he attended where he sat at the conference table, a small but steady voice in a room, his ideas often ignored or dismissed. He thought of the countless emails he had sent out proposing new initiatives or improvements, only for them to be buried under a pile of paperwork by colleagues who were better at playing the game than doing the work. The truth was undeniable. He was stuck.
He was good at his job, yes.
He was responsible, reliable, and efficient. But those qualities alone hadn't been enough to propel him forward. They had only kept him in the same place for years, never advancing, never moving forward. Every year, Marcus had watched as people less qualified than him climbed the corporate ladder, while he remained at the same level, always one step away from the promotion that would change his life. It wasn't just about the money, though, or the title. Marcus had long ago realized that climbing the corporate ladder wasn't just about proving his worth to the company. It was about proving something to himself. He had always prided himself on his ability to work hard, to make something out of nothing, to build from the ground up. But now, in his 30s, he wondered whether he had wasted too much time trying to fit into a system that didn't value his full potential. He had spent years tailoring himself to fit the mold of what corporate America demanded, and now he was wondering if it had been all in vain. He had tried to push the thoughts aside, but they lingered like a cloud hanging over his head. Wasn't it time he took control of his future? Wasn't it time he stepped out of the box he had built around himself? The fear of rejection, the uncertainty of stepping into the unknown, it was all so overwhelming. And yet, he couldn't ignore the undeniable itch for something more, something better. The yearning for a role that didn't just offer a paycheck but also purpose and fulfillment. Marcus sat down at his desk and opened his email inbox, but the notifications were as predictable as ever. Status updates, client reports, meeting invites. The same old grind. His phone buzzed on the edge of the desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Andrea. Andrea, how are you feeling? Still thinking about the new opportunity? Marcus sighed, running his hand over his face. He hadn't replied to her the night before. He had been too absorbed in his own thoughts, unsure of how to articulate the whirlwind of emotions and doubts that were swirling inside him. Andrea had been supportive, encouraging even, but he knew she was also tired of hearing him complain about the same things. They had been together long enough for her to understand his frustrations. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to take the plunge. The familiar comfort of his current life, with all its flaws and limitations, was hard to let go of. At least it was safe. At least he knew what to expect. But that was the problem. Marcus had become so comfortable with the known that he had stopped dreaming. He had stopped pushing for more. Even when he could see the boundaries of his career slowly closing in, he had accepted it. That was the nature of his life now. Enduring, surviving, but not truly living. He picked up his phone and typed a quick response. Marcus, I'm still thinking about it. It's just a lot to process. I don't know if I'm ready to make such a big change. Almost immediately, Andrea replied. Andrea, I get it, but you've been talking about wanting something more for years. I think it's time you take a chance. Life's too short to play it safe all the time. Her words hit him like a jolt of electricity. He couldn't remember the last time he had really taken a risk, the last time he had stepped outside of his comfort zone and embraced the unknown. It was all too easy to settle into the rhythm of everyday life, to pretend that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. The thought gnawed at him for the rest of the day. It wasn't just about a new job, it was about the fear of being stuck forever. The fear of waking up in 10 or 20 years, still in the same role, still feeling unfulfilled, still wondering what could have been. What had he worked so hard for if he couldn't take a chance on himself now? That night, after dinner, Marcus found himself scrolling through Jason's LinkedIn profile again. The photo of his former college friend, smiling in a business suit, exuded confidence and success. Jason had clearly made it. He had left behind the traditional corporate world in search of something better, and now he was thriving in a place that valued diversity and innovation. The more Marcus thought about it, the more the idea of working for a company like that seemed appealing. It wasn't just about the prestige of the role or the salary. It was the environment, the potential to work with a team that truly valued his perspective, a place where he wouldn't have to constantly prove himself. But there was still that nagging voice in the back of his mind. What if it wasn't as perfect as it seemed? What if, in the end, this was just another company with empty promises? What if the same forces that had kept him stagnant in his current role would follow him to the new job? He could already picture the awkward first day, the skepticism from new colleagues who were unsure of his place. It wasn't as if his race hadn't mattered in every job he'd ever had. Corporate spaces were still notoriously white and male-dominated, and he knew he'd be seen differently, no matter how much he tried to prove his worth. The doubt was suffocating, but so was the longing for change. The decision loomed over him, and Marcus found himself unable to escape it. He thought of his father, who had worked for the same company his entire life, and how his career had never amounted to much. His father had worked hard, but the world had never given him a fair chance, and now, in his retirement, he was stuck in the same financial rut he had been in for years. Marcus could feel the weight of that legacy pressing down on him. Was he doomed to make the same mistakes? Or could he change his path before it was too late? As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't keep living in fear. He had to act. The opportunity Jason had presented to him wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to redefine his career, to take control of his future, to finally live up to his potential. He had to take the leap. Even if he wasn't sure where it would lead, even if the road was uncertain, he knew that staying where he was would only lead to more frustration, more disappointment. With a deep breath, Marcus picked up his phone and sent Jason a message. "Marcus, I'm in. Let's make this happen." In that moment, something shifted. Marcus had taken the first step. It wasn't a guaranteed success, but it was the only choice that felt right. No longer willing to let fear dictate his future, Marcus had made the decision to step out of his comfort zone, to embrace the unknown. He didn't know where this new journey would take him, but for the first time in a long while, he was excited about what came next. The first day at his new job arrived with an unexpected sense of clarity. Marcus had mentally prepared for this moment since he accepted Jason's offer. He had run through every scenario, every conversation, every possible outcome. And yet, as he stepped off the train that morning and walked toward the sleek, glass and steel building that would now be his office, Marcus felt a pit in his stomach. He had never been one to back down from challenges, but the unknowns of this new position felt more daunting than he had anticipated. This wasn't just about a new role. It was about stepping into a different world, one that was distinctly unfamiliar in its pace, its culture, and its expectations. The building loomed ahead, an imposing structure that seemed to reflect the ambitions of those who worked inside. As he crossed the lobby, the sleek marble floors and modern decor seemed to be part of a vision of a company that had it all figured out. Bright light flooded through expansive windows, illuminating a space that felt like something straight out of a business magazine. It was a sharp contrast to the stale cubicles and sterile corporate halls of his old job. He hadn't realized how much he had grown accustomed to the drab, uninspiring environment until he walked into this new space, where every corner buzzed with innovation and energy. The people here seemed different too. There was a visible sense of purpose in the way they moved, confident, driven, but also relaxed, as if they had already found a balance between hard work and personal satisfaction. Jason had told him this place would be different, that the company valued diversity and inclusion. Marcus had listened, but now that he was standing in the middle of it, he was still unsure what to expect. Would it really be different? Or was this just another corporate facade, another place where people like him would have to fight tooth and nail to prove their worth? As he entered the elevator, Marcus was joined by two other employees, both white, both dressed in business casual attire. They exchanged polite greetings, but the silence was palpable. Marcus could feel their eyes flicker over him, noting his black skin, his newness to the office, the uncertainty that clung to him like a second skin. He had been on the receiving end of that look so many times before in his career, the subtle, unspoken evaluation of whether he belonged in a space that had historically been reserved for people who looked nothing like him. It was a feeling he had long since learned to brush off, but today, in this unfamiliar environment, it was harder to ignore. The elevator doors opened to the 18th floor, and Marcus stepped out, following the signs toward his new office. His pulse quickened. The open-plan workspace was a far cry from the private, quiet office he had occupied in his previous role. Here, everything was designed for collaboration. Teams of young, energetic people sat at long, communal tables, talking, brainstorming, or typing away at their computers. The space had a creative, almost chaotic energy to it, with bright colors and modern artwork splashed across the walls. People seemed comfortable here, comfortable in their own skin, comfortable with their colleagues, and comfortable with the work they were doing. Jason had left detailed instructions for Marcus the night before, but as he walked through the open office, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was out of place. He had spent over a decade in a world of formal meetings and corporate hierarchy, where rules were clear and boundaries were rigid. But here, the lines were blurrier. People were laughing, collaborating openly, and exchanging ideas freely. No one seemed to be worried about the traditional trappings of corporate politics, the hierarchy, the office politics, the age-old games that had kept him at arm's length from true success for so long. The more Marcus observed, the more he realized that this environment was a far cry from anything he had ever experienced. It was thrilling, yet overwhelming. Marcus. Jason's voice broke through his internal thoughts as he approached. You made it. I'm glad to see you're here on time. Come on, let me show you around. Jason was his first and only friend in this new space, and he was as enthusiastic and welcoming as ever. The familiarity of Jason's smile gave Marcus a fleeting sense of comfort, but it didn't last long. The sheer scale of the company and the openness of the workspace made Marcus feel like an outsider. He followed Jason down the hallway, passing open offices and glass-walled meeting rooms. He couldn't help but notice how different it felt, the pace, the tone, the energy. This was a world built around disruption, innovation, and change. A world where risk-taking was not just encouraged but celebrated. Here's where the real magic happens, Jason said as he gestured toward a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. This is where we do our strategy meetings. We're always brainstorming new ideas here. I want you to feel comfortable coming in and sharing your thoughts. You've got a lot to offer, Marcus. I'm really excited for you to be part of the team. Marcus nodded, forcing a smile. He couldn't deny the opportunity that lay before him, but there was still a part of him that hesitated. The weight of what he had left behind, the familiarity, the stability, felt like a distant memory now, but it was still there, lurking in the back of his mind. What if he wasn't enough for this place? What if he wasn't able to adapt to this new world that seemed so different from everything he had ever known? Jason walked him past several more departments, introducing him to his new colleagues. Most were friendly, eager to welcome him to the team, but Marcus could sense the underlying curiosity in their eyes. His presence here wasn't just a change in roles, it was a statement, one that signaled the company's commitment to diversifying its leadership. He had been hired not just for his skill set, but for the message his hiring sent. And while that message was empowering in many ways, it also felt like an immense responsibility. The next few days were a blur of onboarding meetings, introductions, and training sessions. Marcus quickly realized that there was an unspoken expectation in this new space: adaptability. People here were expected to think on their feet, to adjust to ever-changing projects, and to collaborate across departments without hesitation. It was a far cry from the rigidity of his old job, where his responsibilities had been clearly defined, and any deviation from the norm had been met with skepticism. He found himself in meetings with teams that worked in a seemingly constant state of flux. Every conversation was filled with what-if scenarios, hypothetical plans, and new ideas that were constantly evolving. There was no room for complacency here. No room for playing it safe. People were encouraged to make mistakes, to fail fast, and to learn from those failures in real time. It was a philosophy that aligned with the company's values of innovation and risk-taking, but it felt alien to Marcus, who had spent years in a world that valued predictability and control above all else. One morning, as Marcus sat in his new office preparing for a strategy meeting, a thought struck him. This was it. This was the moment where he could either step up or fall behind. His old job had taught him how to play by the rules, how to avoid rocking the boat and instead quietly succeed in the shadows. But here, there were no shadows to hide in. Here, he was expected to take the reins, to contribute, to challenge the status quo. The pressure mounted, but so did the excitement. For the first time in his career, Marcus felt like he was being pushed to be more than just a cog in a machine. He was being asked to be a leader, whether he was ready for it or not. The first real test came just 2 weeks into his new role. During a company-wide brainstorming session on a new project, Marcus was asked to present his thoughts on the direction the team should take. His mind raced as he stood in front of a room full of colleagues, many of whom were more experienced than he was in this type of creative, fast-paced environment. His palms were sweaty, his heart raced, but he knew this was his moment. He had been given the opportunity to speak, to share his perspective, and to make an impact. As he opened his mouth to speak, Marcus realized that his years of experience had prepared him for this moment more than he had allowed himself to believe. He wasn't just a new face in the room. He was someone with a fresh perspective, someone who had seen how innovation could thrive in spaces where others had been too afraid to take risks. He spoke with confidence, presenting ideas that were bold, unconventional, and in many ways, just what the team needed to hear. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before the nods and affirmations began. Jason, sitting in the back, gave him a thumbs up. Marcus felt a surge of pride. He had made it through the first hurdle. But as the meeting ended and he returned to his desk, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There was much more to come, and every day in this unfamiliar world was a chance to prove himself all over again. The shift was not immediate, nor was it easy. Every day presented new challenges, new opportunities for failure and growth. But with each passing day, Marcus began to feel more at home in this unfamiliar space. He was still learning, still adapting, but he could feel the walls he had built around himself starting to crumble, replaced by the understanding that this was where he was meant to be, not because it was easy, but because it was exactly what he needed to push himself further than he had ever gone before. Marcus felt the shift immediately. The first few weeks had been a whirlwind of new faces, new systems, and new expectations. He had found himself playing catch-up in every meeting, scrambling to learn the names of colleagues, the ins and outs of the company's processes, and most critically, the expectations of his new role. It was as if the ground beneath his feet was constantly shifting, and the stability he had once felt in his previous job now seemed like a distant memory. The challenge wasn't just the newness of the job, it was the speed at which everything moved, the relentless pressure to keep up, to perform, to innovate. At first, Marcus struggled with this pace. In his old job, he had known the rhythms of the company, the daily meetings, the weekly check-ins, the set procedures for handling projects. But here, everything was fluid. A plan that was set in stone one day could be completely rewritten the next. Projects evolved in real time, feedback was given immediately, and decisions were made on the fly. It was exciting, yes, but it was also overwhelming. He had to adapt to a completely different way of thinking, a world where no answer was ever final, no solution was permanent, and flexibility was key. On one of his first days in the office, he was invited to a brainstorming session for a new product launch. The energy in the room was palpable. Everyone was speaking over one another, tossing out ideas at a rapid pace. It was as if everyone had already unlocked the secret code to success, and Marcus was still trying to figure out the rules of the game. The ideas came fast and furious, and yet, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was behind. He had been hired for his experience in project management, his ability to see a plan through from start to finish, but here, it seemed as if the plan was secondary to the ideas, the vision, the potential. Everyone was looking for creativity, originality, and flair, but Marcus wasn't sure how to integrate that into his normally pragmatic mindset. He hesitated when it came his turn to contribute. His mind raced, trying to connect the dots between the ideas that were already on the table, but the words wouldn't come out right. He knew that he had something valuable to offer, his years of experience, his understanding of how projects should be executed, but he couldn't figure out how to articulate it in a way that fit the fast-moving, free-flowing nature of the team's conversation. When he finally spoke, his words felt stilted, too calculated for the creative chaos around him. The room fell silent for a brief moment. Jason, noticing the pause, quickly interjected with enthusiasm. "Great point, Marcus. We'll definitely need someone to take charge of the execution side of things. This is why we brought you in." While Jason's words were encouraging, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his contribution had been somewhat disconnected from the energy of the group. The team was filled with big ideas, and Marcus was struggling to understand how his skill set, honed over years of corporate structure and execution, could complement that. It was a humbling moment. Marcus had always prided himself on being the steady hand, the one who could keep everything running smoothly, even when chaos threatened to derail a project. But in this environment, that approach felt outdated, too slow. He could feel his confidence begin to wane. Was he simply too set in his ways? Had he spent too many years working in environments that stifled creativity and innovation, only to find that now, when creativity was needed most, he was at a loss? For the first time in his life, Marcus began to question whether he was truly cut out for this role. The thought of returning to his old job crossed his mind more than once. At least there, he knew what to expect. There he was in control. But in this new world, the rules were still being written, and he was struggling to keep up with the pace. Jason could see the doubt in Marcus's eyes. He wasn't the type to shy away from a challenge, but even he could sense that the transition was harder for Marcus than he had anticipated. Over lunch one day, Jason pulled him aside. "Marcus, I can see this is tough, but you've got something these guys don't. You've been in the trenches. You understand the big picture. You can see how all the pieces fit together, even when the chaos is at its peak." Marcus nodded but didn't respond immediately. Jason's words rang true, but they didn't change the way Marcus felt in the moment. The disconnect was still there, and it was hard to ignore. The company wanted boldness, innovation, disruption, qualities that Marcus wasn't sure how to embody. He wasn't naturally someone who thrived on risk. He had always been the one to assess the situation, gather the facts, and make decisions based on logic. But here, they were asking him to throw caution to the wind and take chances. Over the following weeks, Marcus began to observe more closely. He watched how his colleagues interacted, how they took risks, and how they bounced back from failure. There was a casual confidence in their approach, a sense of comfort with failure that Marcus found foreign but fascinating. In his previous role, failure was something to be avoided at all costs. It was something that could set back an entire project, set off a chain of negative consequences, and damage relationships within the team. But here, failure seemed to be a part of the process. It wasn't the end of the road. It was simply an opportunity to pivot, to try something different, to learn and move forward. The more Marcus observed, the more he realized that his previous mindset, one built around avoiding mistakes at all costs, was actually hindering his growth. He had spent so much time trying to control every detail, to avoid the chaos, that he had never allowed himself the freedom to embrace the unpredictable nature of real innovation. It wasn't just about doing things the right way. It was about challenging the system, questioning assumptions, and being open to new ideas, even if they seemed risky or uncomfortable. This realization was a turning point for Marcus. He began to embrace the discomfort, to lean into the uncertainty. The next time a brainstorming session rolled around, Marcus didn't hesitate. He let go of the fear of being wrong, of saying something out of place. He shared his thoughts openly, allowing his ideas to evolve in real time, rather than trying to perfect them before speaking. His colleagues responded positively to this new side of him. They encouraged him, offering feedback that helped him refine his thoughts, but more importantly, they respected his willingness to contribute in a more open, less calculated way. Marcus found himself growing more comfortable with the ambiguity that had once intimidated him. He started to speak up more in meetings, offering ideas that were bolder and more creative. His colleagues began to appreciate the unique perspective he brought to the table. His years of experience in the corporate world gave him a strategic edge that others lacked, while his newfound willingness to experiment and take risks helped him bridge the gap between execution and creativity. Slowly but surely, he began to find his rhythm, carving out a space for himself in a culture that had once felt foreign and intimidating. But it wasn't just about speaking up in meetings or offering innovative ideas. Marcus realized that he also had to adapt in his day-to-day work. The project management systems that he had relied on in the past were no longer sufficient for the fluid, constantly changing nature of this new environment. He had to learn to be more flexible, to pivot when necessary, and to trust in the team's collective ability to move quickly and make decisions. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the team, the culture, and the company as a whole. As the weeks went on, Marcus found himself taking on more responsibility. He was assigned a major project, a product launch that would require him to coordinate multiple teams across different departments. At first, the task seemed overwhelming. He had never managed a project of this scale in such a fast-paced environment, and the stakes were high. But this time, Marcus felt a sense of readiness he hadn't felt before. He had adapted. He had learned how to move with the flow of the company, to embrace the uncertainty, and to lead with confidence. The project went off without a hitch. It wasn't perfect. There were hiccups along the way, moments when things didn't go according to plan, but Marcus had learned how to navigate those obstacles without losing sight of the bigger picture. The team trusted him, and the results spoke for themselves. That success was the turning point. It was the moment Marcus realized that he wasn't just fitting into this new role, he was beginning to thrive in it. He had adapted to the environment, yes, but more than that, he had started to internalize the values of the company: risk-taking, innovation, and collaboration. He wasn't just executing plans anymore. He was creating them. He wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was part of a larger vision, a force that was driving the company forward. It was a long road from uncertainty to confidence, but Marcus could finally see the path ahead clearly. And for the first time since accepting the job, he felt certain that this was exactly where he was meant to be. The project launch was a massive success. It was everything Marcus had hoped for: a seamless execution, an enthusiastic response from the team, and a product that performed well beyond expectations. His name was at the forefront of the company's communications. The CEO made a point to personally thank him in a company-wide email, praising his leadership in bringing the project from concept to launch with such precision. Colleagues who had once seen him as a newcomer now looked at him with new respect. Jason, too, was beaming with pride. "You did it, Marcus. You showed them all what you're capable of," he said, clapping him on the back after the post-launch meeting. For a moment, it felt like the culmination of everything Marcus had worked for. He had finally proved that he belonged in this world of fast-paced innovation and unyielding ambition. This was what he had wanted: recognition, respect, and a sense of accomplishment. It was a moment that Marcus had long imagined, seeing himself in the role of a leader, not just a follower. The validation was exhilarating. For a brief period, he basked in the glow of his success, enjoying the congratulatory emails, the kind words from his team, and the acknowledgement of his hard work. But as the days passed, the initial rush of triumph began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. It wasn't that Marcus didn't appreciate the recognition. He had worked hard for this moment, and it felt good to have others acknowledge his skills and efforts. But something about the experience felt hollow. There was an emptiness beneath the applause, a feeling that the victory had not been as satisfying as he had imagined it would be. The success of the project was undeniable. The launch had exceeded the company's expectations, and Marcus had played a pivotal role in that success. But when the initial celebrations died down, Marcus was left with a sense of uncertainty. He had achieved everything he thought he wanted: the respect of his colleagues, the recognition of his talents, and the satisfaction of leading a successful project. Yet, as he sat in his office one morning, reviewing the post-launch reports, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't that he didn't care about the project or the company's success. It was more that the accomplishment itself hadn't given him the fulfillment he expected. There was a quiet moment of reflection, a brief lull in the whirlwind of tasks that had kept him busy for weeks. He found himself staring at his desk, the fluorescent light above flickering slightly, and he realized that despite everything, something still gnawed at him. This success, which had seemed so monumental just a few days ago, now felt almost like a fleeting distraction. He had pushed himself to the limits, fought through moments of self-doubt, and struggled to fit into a world that had once seemed foreign. Yet now that he had finally earned his place, there was a disorienting silence in the aftermath. Jason had taken him out for drinks that evening to celebrate the triumph. As they clinked glasses, Jason said, "You've earned it, Marcus. This is just the beginning. You're going to keep climbing. You've got the skills, the mindset, and the vision. The sky's the limit." Jason's words were full of optimism, and Marcus knew he meant every word. But as the night wore on and the conversation shifted to other topics, Marcus couldn't help but feel a disconnect. He wasn't sure if it was the alcohol or just his growing sense of unease, but he started to realize that he had been chasing a version of success that wasn't entirely his own. The validation felt good, yes, but it was based on external measures, on what other people thought of him, on what he had achieved in their eyes. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear. He had been living in pursuit of other people's expectations, trying to prove something to them, and in the process, he had lost sight of what he truly wanted from this job, from this role, and from his life. For years, Marcus had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, to prove his worth in spaces that hadn't always welcomed him. The desire for success had driven him, had kept him focused on the goal, acquiring the respect of others, securing a spot at the table. But now that he was here, now that he had finally achieved what he thought was the pinnacle of success, he realized that there was no satisfaction in this achievement. It felt like a false victory, a shallow accomplishment that had come at the cost of his own sense of purpose. Marcus spent the next few days in a fog. He found himself attending meetings, replying to emails, and moving through the motions of his day, but he felt disconnected from the work. His mind wandered during strategy sessions, his thoughts drifting away from the tasks at hand. He realized that while he had been working so hard to fit into this new environment, to win approval, and to prove his worth, he hadn't been considering whether this was truly the kind of success he wanted. Was this really the life he had imagined for himself? Was this truly the kind of work that would bring him happiness and fulfillment in the long term? He had always believed that success came with external validation, that the accolades, the praise, and the respect from others were signs that he was on the right path. But now that he had achieved all those things, he was left with a sinking feeling in his chest. The applause had faded, and in its place, there was only the quiet hum of the office and the distant realization that he was still searching for something more. It became even clearer to him as he watched his colleagues, people who seemed to thrive in this environment, who seemed to genuinely enjoy the chaos and the constant flux of ideas. They spoke passionately about the company's mission, about the potential for growth and innovation. But Marcus didn't feel that same fire. He found himself asking, "What is it that drives me? What is it that I'm actually here for?" The contrast between his own uncertainty and the enthusiasm he saw in others only made him feel more isolated. It was as if they were all speaking a different language, one that he hadn't yet fully learned. They were deeply connected to the mission of the company, to the vision that was being built, while Marcus felt like an outsider who had just stumbled upon this path by accident. The success, the recognition, it all seemed so hollow now that he had achieved it. What did it mean if he didn't feel the passion for the work that others did? What good was the praise if it didn't fill the emptiness he now felt inside? He thought back to the times in his previous job when he had been content, when he had known exactly what his purpose was. There had been a certain peace in the predictability of that role, a sense of accomplishment that came from knowing his work had real-world impact, from seeing tangible results in his team's output. In this new world, where the focus was always on the future, on innovation and risk, he found himself questioning whether he could ever truly feel that same sense of satisfaction again. Jason, sensing Marcus's growing disconnect, tried to reassure him. "Marcus, you've got this. The first big win is always the hardest. From here on out, things will just keep getting better. Trust me." But Jason's optimism, while genuine, felt increasingly irrelevant. Marcus didn't need more encouragement. He needed clarity. He needed to understand what he wanted, not just from his job, but from his life. He couldn't keep chasing after external validation if it didn't align with his own values, with what truly mattered to him. As the weeks dragged on, The weight of this realization settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders. The recognition he had received, the promotions, the praise, felt increasingly insignificant in light of the deeper questions he was facing. Had he spent all this time chasing a version of success that was never meant for him? Was this what he truly wanted? And if not, what did that mean for his future? In the quiet moments when the office was empty, Marcus couldn't help but wonder whether there was more to life than just the hustle for the next big win. He had gotten what he thought he wanted, but the victory felt empty. The applause had faded, and in its place, he was left with a feeling of disillusionment, a nagging sense that the very things he had fought for had only led him further away from the path he had imagined for himself. The tension Marcus felt in the days following the project launch only grew stronger. At first, it had been a quiet unease, a subtle gnawing in the back of his mind. But now it was all-encompassing. He found himself waking up each morning with a pit in his stomach, dreading the very thing he had once worked so tirelessly to achieve. The accolades, the praise, the recognition, none of it seemed to matter anymore. What had once felt like a dream was now a burden. Marcus had always believed that success was the answer. He had thought that once he proved his worth, once he climbed the ladder and earned the respect of his peers, he would feel a sense of fulfillment. But now that he had reached the summit, he felt more lost than ever. The higher he climbed, the more he realized how disconnected he had become from the very things that had once brought him satisfaction. The work itself, the team he was leading, the larger mission, none of it resonated with him the way it once had. The drive that had pushed him for years, that relentless pursuit of success, had lost its meaning. The first signs that something was wrong came when he began to pull away from his team. Where once he had enjoyed the camaraderie and collaboration that came with working closely together on a project, he now found himself retreating into the confines of his office. The meetings that used to energize him, where ideas flowed freely and people worked in sync toward a common goal, now felt draining. He began to dread the very interactions that once inspired him. What had once been a source of excitement, working with a diverse group of creative minds, had become a source of discomfort. It wasn't that Marcus didn't respect his colleagues, far from it. He had grown fond of many of them. But now, every conversation felt like an obligation rather than a meaningful exchange. He began to notice how detached he had become, how much he resented the pressure to keep performing, to keep coming up with fresh ideas, to continue leading the team to more victories. His mind wandered during meetings, his thoughts often consumed by the growing sense of emptiness that had settled in his chest. The recognition that had once felt so sweet now tasted bitter. The stress that had always been a part of his job now felt unbearable. He had been through stressful situations before, late nights, tight deadlines, difficult clients, but nothing had prepared him for the relentless pressure of maintaining his success in this new role. His inbox was constantly flooded with messages, requests for his input, updates on various projects that required his attention. The weight of responsibility was heavier than he had imagined. What had once felt like a dream job now felt like a never-ending cycle of meetings and expectations. And it wasn't just the work that was starting to weigh on him. His personal life, too, had begun to suffer. Marcus had always prided himself on being able to balance his career with his personal life. But now that balance was slipping away. He was spending more and more time at the office, staying late into the evening to finish tasks or prepare for the next day's meetings. The phone calls with his family became less frequent, the dinners with friends more rare. Even the quiet moments of self-reflection he had once cherished seemed impossible to come by. At first, he hadn't noticed the toll his work was taking on his personal life. But then one evening his phone rang. It was his younger sister, Carla. "Marcus, we need you here." "Mom's not doing well," she said, her voice trembling. Marcus's heart sank. His mother, who had always been a rock for their family, had fallen ill. The news hit him like a punch to the gut. Without thinking, he immediately left the office and caught the first flight home. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, family meetings, and trying to come to terms with his mother's declining health. During this time, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on how absent he had been from his family over the past several months. He had been so consumed by his work, by the desire to prove himself and maintain his position, that he had neglected the people who had always been there for him. It wasn't just that he had lost touch with them, it was that, in his pursuit of success, he had lost touch with who he was. The reality of the situation hit him hard as he sat by his mother's bedside, holding her hand and watching her sleep. What was all this success for, he wondered? What had he truly gained if it meant sacrificing his relationships, his peace of mind, and his connection to the things that mattered most? The accolades, the promotions, the praise, none of it seemed to matter in this moment. His mind kept going back to the realization that he had spent so much time chasing external validation that he had forgotten to nurture the internal values that had once guided him. When Marcus returned to the office after the brief family emergency, he felt like a stranger to himself. The sense of unease that had been brewing in him for weeks now felt like an undeniable presence. He sat at his desk, staring at the piles of work that awaited him, but none of it seemed to hold any meaning anymore. The emails, the meetings, the deadlines, they all felt like distractions from the deeper truth that he had begun to confront. He had achieved everything he thought he wanted, but in the process, he had lost himself. The price of this success was higher than he had ever imagined. He tried to push through, to return to the work that had once been his passion, but the cracks in his resolve were becoming more apparent. He was no longer able to compartmentalize his dissatisfaction. The pressures of work were beginning to seep into every aspect of his life, and he realized that he was no longer the person he had set out to be. The drive for success, for recognition, for external validation, it had consumed him, leaving him empty in ways he had never anticipated. Marcus found himself facing the harsh truth. What he thought was the ultimate achievement had come at the expense of his happiness, his peace of mind, and his sense of purpose. He had sacrificed his relationships, his health, and his personal well-being for the sake of a job title, for the promise of success. And now, as he sat in his office, staring at the screen in front of him, he couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that he had been chasing the wrong things all along. The realization hit him like a wave. The very things he had worked so hard for, the promotions, the recognition, the respect, were not the answers he had hoped they would be. They had not brought him the fulfillment he had longed for. Instead, they had left him feeling more isolated, more disconnected from the things that truly mattered in life. In his pursuit of success, he had lost sight of the deeper meaning of work, of life, and of what it meant to be truly fulfilled. The decision was now clear. Marcus could not continue down this path, not if it meant sacrificing everything else in his life. He couldn't keep living in pursuit of goals that weren't aligned with his own values. He needed to make a change, a radical one. It was time to step back, to reassess what truly mattered, and to figure out how to reconcile the person he had become with the person he wanted to be. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began to withdraw from the constant cycle of work. He started to spend more time with his family, reestablishing the connections he had neglected. He made time for quiet reflection, for moments of stillness that allowed him to reconnect with the parts of himself that had gotten lost in the chaos of success. And as he did, he began to realize that the price he had paid for success wasn't just measured in missed opportunities or sacrificed relationships. It was also measured in the loss of his sense of self. Marcus began to understand that true fulfillment could not come from external validation, from titles, or from achieving someone else's definition of success. It had to come from within, from understanding who he was, what he valued, and what he truly wanted from life. This was the price he had paid for his success, a disconnect from his own identity, from the things that had once brought him peace and joy. It was an early Monday morning when Marcus returned to the office after several weeks of reflection. The noise of the workplace, the clattering of keyboards, the hum of fluorescent lights, the hum of colleagues' voices, seemed the same as it always had. Yet for Marcus, everything felt different. He had undergone a quiet transformation during his time away, and while the office environment hadn't changed, he had. The familiar sights and sounds no longer filled him with the same urgency or desire. His priorities had shifted. As he walked through the glass doors of the office building, he was immediately struck by the contrast between the bustling energy of his colleagues and his own internal stillness. People greeted him with the usual enthusiasm, congratulating him on the successful project launch and updating him on the latest developments. But instead of the flurry of adrenaline that he might have once felt in these moments, Marcus found himself simply listening, nodding politely, and allowing their words to wash over him without becoming deeply involved. There was a calm in his response, a distance that had not been there before. The truth was, Marcus had begun to question what it was all for. The praise, the emails, the constant demand for excellence. What did it all add up to in the end? The pursuit of more, the desire to climb higher and higher, had only brought him a sense of emptiness. He had been running for so long, chasing an ideal that had never been his own. And now, as he sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over his keyboard, he realized that he could no longer pretend that success in this form was enough. He had spent days, weeks even, contemplating the next steps in his life. During his time away from the office, he had reconnected with family, revisited old passions, and spent time in solitude, reading, meditating, and reflecting. Marcus had needed to step away from the constant pressure to succeed and regain a sense of clarity. He needed to understand who he was outside of the accolades, the promotions, and the corporate achievements. What did he want from life? What did he want from this job? The answers hadn't come easily, but over time, Marcus had started to understand that his need for external validation, his obsession with being seen as successful, had come at the cost of his well-being. He had forgotten what it was like to find joy in simple things, to embrace moments of peace without feeling like he was wasting time. In the pursuit of success, he had neglected the parts of himself that made him feel whole. As he sat in his office, Marcus reflected on the person he had been when he first joined the company, full of ambition, eager to prove himself, willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of achievement. But that person, the one consumed by the relentless drive for success, no longer felt like who he truly was. The pressure to fit into that mold had caused him to forget the things that truly mattered to him, the people he loved, the passions he had once pursued, and the quiet satisfaction that came from simply living in the moment. But Marcus knew that he could not simply walk away from his job. He had responsibilities now. He had a team that relied on him, a position that required his leadership. And despite the disillusionment he had felt, he still wanted to contribute. He still believed in the power of teamwork, in the ability to create something meaningful, even if the traditional markers of success no longer held the same appeal. He had to find a way to reconcile his newfound truth with his role in the company. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a sense of clarity. He could still be a leader, perhaps even a better one, by focusing on the values that mattered most to him. It wasn't about being the top performer or getting the most recognition. It was about building a team that trusted him, fostering an environment where creativity and collaboration could thrive. It was about leading with authenticity, showing his team that he valued their contributions and that success wasn't just about hitting numbers or meeting deadlines, but about growth, learning, and mutual respect. That afternoon, Marcus scheduled a meeting with his team. They gathered in the conference room, a mix of familiar faces who had worked alongside him for the past few months. Some of them were eager to hear what he had to say, while others seemed more indifferent. The pressure was on, there was still a lot of work to be done, and the expectations remained high. But as Marcus stood in front of them, he felt a strange sense of peace. The anxiety that used to accompany these meetings, the need to impress, to perform, was gone. He was no longer concerned with trying to live up to an image of the perfect manager. "Listen, I've been thinking a lot about where we're headed as a team," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "And I need to be honest with you all about something I've learned over the past few weeks. I've spent a lot of time chasing success, chasing recognition, chasing achievements, and I've come to realize that those things, while important, aren't what truly matter in the long run. What matters is how we work together, how we grow as individuals, and how we treat one another along the way. My job, as your leader, isn't to push you to the limits of what we can accomplish, but to create an environment where we can all be our best selves." The room was quiet. Marcus could see the surprise in their eyes. His admission was unexpected, a shift from the ambitious, results-driven manager they were used to. But he could also see a flicker of curiosity, a subtle shift in the way they were looking at him. He wasn't just the guy who called the shots anymore. He was someone they could relate to, someone who had learned from his own mistakes and understood the importance of balance. "I'm not saying we shouldn't work hard," Marcus continued, "but I am saying that we need to be mindful of why we're doing what we're doing. We have to remember why we're here, to build something meaningful, to grow, and to support each other.
And that starts with me.
I need to lead with authenticity and vulnerability. I need to be a better manager, a better colleague, and a better human being. And I'm asking for your support in this." There was a pause, and then Jason, the colleague who had supported him from the beginning, spoke up. "I think that's exactly what we need, Marcus. It's been easy to get caught up in the pressure, in the numbers, in the deadlines. But if we focus on building something together, on supporting each other, I think we'll be better for it." The conversation shifted, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. His team responded with enthusiasm, sharing ideas for how they could improve collaboration, how they could be more mindful of one another's needs. It wasn't about making big promises or setting unrealistic goals. It was about fostering an environment of trust and mutual respect, where each person could contribute authentically without fear of judgment. That evening, as Marcus returned home, he felt a sense of accomplishment, not because of any external recognition, but because he had found a deeper sense of purpose. He was no longer chasing a version of success that didn't resonate with him. Instead, he had redefined what success meant on his own terms. Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt. But he was no longer the man who chased external validation. He had learned that success, at least the kind worth having, wasn't about what others thought of him, but about how he lived in alignment with his values. He had come to understand that true leadership didn't come from controlling others, but from inspiring them through vulnerability, authenticity, and a shared commitment to growth. In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued to refine his approach to leadership. He checked in with his team regularly, creating space for honest conversations, feedback, and collaboration. He found that the more he embraced his own vulnerabilities, the stronger the team became. They began to trust him not because he was the perfect manager, but because he was real, approachable, and committed to their collective success. Marcus had changed, and while he wasn't sure whether that change was for the better or worse, he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer chasing an empty dream. He had found his own path, one that allowed him to thrive both professionally and personally. And in doing so, he had finally found peace.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.